Hello and welcome to A Blind Date with Knowledge, the podcast shining a spotlight on research in the Northeast. I'm one of your co-hosts, Stephen Liggett, and here, as ever, is the great Laura Brady.
Hi, Stephen.
Hi, Laura. So we've both been working pretty hard to line up the next guests that hopefully will appear on the podcast, Laura, and we have noticed that apart from obviously their connection with research, that there's also something else to them. Do you think, Laura?
Yeah, I love the way that our themes have developed over the course of this project, and we expanded the themes more so this past 6 months, and now definitely you can see new themes recurring, or I guess new to us, new to our discussions, based around strategy and leadership style, which of course not just in research but any sort of organisational structure. It's very important that workers are cared for and aligned, and it'd be really interesting to get the perspectives of some of the guests that we've got coming up. So what was your thinking behind some of the people we've been invited? What were you sort of drawn to in terms of this slightly new direction?
Yeah, so I suppose you've summarised it great there, but there seems to be a growing need within, like you say, in all workforces to recognise your peers and colleagues as humans, and how we start to bring the best out of people to kind of help with the challenges that we're all facing at work. It could be, organisational pressures, it could be clinical pressures, and so it's how we start to tap into the needs and the well-being of others to really start to drive the change that we need to see.
Yeah, exactly. So I guess a lot of that awareness was instigated probably off the back of the pandemic.
Yeah.
And now we're in a time of, okay, we're aware of these things. There's a spotlight on well-being, and how do we actually turn that awareness into something that's tangible for the day-to-day workings?
100%. And we think that the guest that we have for this episode of A Blind Date with Knowledge is the perfect person to start to explain some of the methods around how we start to coach staff, how we start to recognise that compassionate leadership as the catalyst for these changes. So do you want to introduce who we have, Laura?
Yeah, I think you're totally right. There's no one better to introduce these themes to A Blind Date with Knowledge than Angela Toppin, who we had the delight of speaking to recently. Super excited to share the conversation that we had.
Yeah, it was great. It was a great discussion. I feel just very inspired to maybe instigate the changes that we would all like to see in our departments and services.
Yeah, inspirational is definitely a good word to describe Angela. I know she was probably cringing at hearing me say that, but yeah, for sure. And I really enjoyed the statement that she shared from a visit to Bletchley Park, which does encapsulate the whole purpose of discussing these themes.
And we'll include that at the end of the podcast, because it's just, it's a great ending. It's a great summary. And we hope after hearing this, you're equally as inspired as we are. Should we get to it?
Yes, let's go. Welcome to this episode of A Blind Date with Knowledge. I'm your host, Laura Brady, with co-host Stephen Liggett.
Great start. Yes, I'm here as well.
And we're here today with Angela Toppin. Hi, Angela.
Hi there. Hi, Laura. Hi, Stephen. Nice to meet you both.
Cheers.
So, would you like to give a brief introduction of yourself and the roles that you sort of have held over the past few years and current posts?
Yeah. So, as you said, my name's Angela. My current role, well, one of my roles is I am head of the Newcastle Joint Research Office. And that's a partnership which spans across Newcastle Hospitals and Newcastle University. I've been in that role now for just under 6 years, and prior to that I was the faculty accountant in the Faculty of Mental Sciences, and I held that position for 18 years. And I think at that point I was ready for a change. I thought when I grew up I don't want to be an accountant anymore. And so I've been doing the role in research now for just under 6 years, and just this month in October I was officially appointed as chair of the NHS R&D Forum. But I am more than what I do at work. So I'm a mum, I've got 2 gorgeous boys, Ethan and Jacob. I'm a wife, I'm a sister, I'm a friend, I'm a Samaritan, and I've got many, many other identities which I do bring into the way I work at work.
That's so important to have that personal touch and that human feel to what you're doing. And like you said about needing that change, like we've spoken before about sort of continuous growth and taking on new roles, definitely helps to develop those. So what impact have you had in your role as head of the NGRO so far? The 6 years, have you seen any changes? Or
Yeah, so when I first came in to the role as head of the Joint Research Office, I did just a quick overview as to where we were with that, because working in that space between academia and the NHS is quite a challenging space to be in. And at the time, there was quite a lot of focus on targets around research, into achieving how many patients you can get into studies, how research can impact in the Research Excellence Framework for the university, missing the point about why we should be coming together across not just the academic and NHS interface, but what was the purpose, what was our shared purpose of coming together to do something. And spent about 3 months looking at that and did a beautiful SWOT analysis and sort of framed it around, it was like a marriage. The GRO was formed in 2006. And so it had been wedded, it had been joined together in matrimony for how long? It must have been about 12, 13 years. And during that marriage, both partners within the marriage had taken their eye off the ball. And it was a case of, well, actually, what is the point in marriage? We can either get some counselling around this and, fight for what's important, which is the shared purpose, or let's just get divorced, and which would be a shame. And the feeling was the effort to stay married was really important, because the shared purpose of working together was to make a difference to people's lives through research, really, in the broadest sense. So it would be a shame for us not to come together through the difficulties of being married to sort of navigate that space. And yes, we will have our own interests in the jobs we do, but they're not going to drive our behaviours because we're stronger together. So yes, that was very early on. What we then did was we had some time out as the team, which is made up of both university and NHS staff, and we created that shared purpose. And the evidence which came from that was the word cloud that came out, and the strongest word of why we come together was the words patients and research. And as long as we've got that North Star, if you will, when we get pulled from whatever direction, this is what we're in it for, it helps understand the environment and the complexity we work in.
Having that shared vision and going in the same direction.
Because working in that space, it's difficult enough with different policies, different procedures, different IT systems. But this is all noise, and we need to move away from the noise and focus on what's important. So we've been doing that now for 5.5, 6 years, and that was so important during the pandemic. Hugely.
So what sort of leadership qualities do you see in yourself that have enabled you to have success in these strategies?
I think it's being honest and being vulnerable, I guess, in certain aspects. When I first joined, I'd been an accountant for 18 years, so you could ask me anything about budgets, plans, forecasts, anything like that, but ask me about a highly technical regulatory thing in research, I didn't have a clue. And within the first couple of weeks of being in post, we were being inspected by the MHRA, and I didn't know, whereas the team did.
So welcome to the job.
Huge welcome. I just sort of got the guys in and said, look, this is coming, who can help? And I know that, and giving those individuals the space to just get on with it and the authority to get on with it, and coming together very early on in that time where they knew I wasn't there to dictate. I'm more of a generalist, pulling from different strengths, and then they're the specialists and they know their job, and giving them the space to run with it and come forward and be honest if they're struggling. And I think that for me set the scene very, very early on, that I wasn't by any means somebody who knew everything about research, but I knew from a previous experience how teams work and networks work and how you get the best out of situations, really.
Yeah.
There's several new themes and concepts around leadership.
Yeah.
You mentioned the word there about allowing yourself to be vulnerable.
Yeah.
To show that you're not a complete leader.
Yeah.
There's a new term going around about trying to be an incomplete leader.
Yeah.
So you try to find the experts to fill the gaps in your knowledge or your practices. I suppose the question on the back of that is, how often do you actually see that in other people in the National Health Service or in research departments and roles that you've held?
Don't. No. It's and this is I've done a lot of research on this myself through the masters. I've just completed the masters. We'll come on to that in a second as well, and why I decided to do that, because this feeds into this vulnerability. And when you work, particularly in hierarchical organisations, the university is hierarchical, the NHS is hierarchical, old-fashioned in that way, where it's command and control, and there's always somebody at the top who knows everything. That's dated in the 60s and 70s. Mm-hmm. That type of leadership, managerial bureaucracy, actually prevents innovative thought and the ability to come together with for new ideas of working together, because it's become a policies drive, and they don't help with that innovative thought. And during the pandemic, to have that type of leadership was absolutely key, where you don't have to seek approval, you just get on with it because you know you've got that team around you to make that decisions. And I'll share with you where I was extremely vulnerable in the pandemic. And it was very early on, it must have been about 6 or 7 weeks in. And as I said earlier, I'm a mum, so I've got 2 kids. My youngest son at the time was about 9, and they were at home. They were homeschooling. My husband was working from home, so that was fine. So I was in many hours, getting the teams together to see what we could do for a vaccine and, the research that needed to be done for the pandemic. And this one day I got home from work, it was late, and my husband said my youngest son had written his diary, and he'd left it open for me to read because he wanted me to read it. And it'd been a struggle. Everybody didn't know what was going on, and I'll come to what happened next. In his diary, he drew a picture of the world, and in that world there was these meteors, as he called them, which looked like COVID, the disease, the thing itself. And he said, COVID has hit me like a meteor hitting the planet. I can no longer go to school, I can no longer play football with my friends, and I can no longer see my grandparents because they're shielding. And all I want is for COVID to go away. And when I read that, I burst into tears at home, and I thought, this is impacting on my kids more than I thought. I was too busy focusing on work and the needs of the team. And the next day I came in with his diary, and I stood on a table in the middle of the office, and I called everybody around, and I said, I'm going to share this with you. You'll understand what I'm going to do next. And I said, I'm going to start working from home a bit more. I don't know what's going to happen with what we're doing. All I know is if we look after each other, we'll get through this, and I need to go home and look after my children. Just for a little bit. But we've got each other's backs, and let's just all be kind to each other. Nobody's got the answer. All we know is we just need to keep an eye on each other and be kind and take it forward that way on. And I think for me that was a massive turning point, because the team realised I was not, even though we'd been putting it in place, I wasn't a hero leader. It wasn't about that at all. You can't not bring things to work that is going on. It's that sort of stuff. Yeah. And that completely changed the culture of the team we've got and cemented that. So you're right, it's about the being vulnerable. We are all human, we're not robots. And people do have things going on outside, and that's not an excuse. It's just to understand other things that people have got going on and how you can support them through whatever way it is, and not follow a policy because that's what the policy says. Take the time to understand the person. So incomplete leadership, absolutely. Yeah,
it's a really admirable approach to me. Like, definitely from what you said before about having the shared vision as well. Getting that reason back into the forefront of people's minds, and why you're going to work and finding the vaccine and doing the research here. It's like everybody that's affected and bringing that.
And it's so refreshing to hear someone speak about things do happen outside of work that then impacts someone's performance at work. There's only so much capacity that someone has. And if you are in touch with things that happen outside of work, you're probably providing that space and time to get the best out of them during the time that they are at work. So just hearing someone have that perspective, I think is really interesting.
Just to sort of go on just a little bit more about that. When the pandemic first struck, the office is made up of both university and NHS colleagues. The university's response was everybody has to go work from home, and the NHS response was everybody has to come in the office. And my response was, I'm not listening to that. What works for you as an individual, because this isn't depending on the employer. I want you to feel safe and to be able to work regardless of where that is. And if you're going to go off because with stress or anxiety but coming in on public transport, that's not right. And if you're going to struggle being at home on your own because there's no source, that's not right either. So we brought in blended workings very early on, and I made it clear to everybody in the team that if anybody was going to get sacked, it would be me, because it was my decision to allow that space to be created and to come together. And again, it's them little things about being brave and doing what's right for the human, and not necessarily what's right for the policy. And yes, I get that, but it's measured risk and measured, what is it that you can achieve. And I thoroughly believe without doing that, we would not have succeeded as a team and what we did during the pandemic.
I think before we potentially shift on to something else, this point is a really important thing to explore, I think. So you mentioned it at the very start there about the organisations that you have been involved in are quite hierarchical, and kind of the structure of an organisation often then kind of reflects how leaders can operate in that structure, and how we potentially maybe start to move from structures that are quite hierarchical to maybe something more of like an ecosystem, or something that reflects a bit more of that, the human-centred approach. In your opinion, how can we start to do that, and the barriers to changing the structures and the leadership are potentially quite a lot?
The huge challenge is culture. And for me, from my experience around hierarchy and privilege, I think it is another word as well. That comes out quite a lot, and I learned a lot of this during my MSc, and I'd love to talk a little bit more around that, because the impact that's had on me as well. And it's about the change in that. It's around giving those people the freedom to operate, and there's evidence out there from Helen Bevan, from the King's Fund. The evidence is all there that if you give people the autonomy to operate, the sense of belonging, they will do anything. And it's about giving them that freedom to try new things and the freedom to fail. And that was something that we just had a conference around the last couple of weeks around. How can we deal with some of the challenges around dignity, respect, empowering staff and colleagues to get on with it. But changing structures when you've got people who see structures as a power structure is very difficult. And it's how you can change the cultures in organisations in something which there's a culture web, and moving that away from structures into networks is really, really important. And the the power will be in the networks as we move forward, and that will actually help with the sustainable change that's needed, because change comes from the bottom up, not top down. Top down is there for a reason. It's there for a governance reason. Get that? But you can't govern complexity. You can't govern the world we live in, where it's so complex and adaptive, and there's so much going on in our environment that you have to adapt quickly. Policies are pointless. It's about frameworks and the ability to act and respond, but be trusted to do that and not be blamed if you get it wrong. And I think we've got a hell of a long way to go in public sector in general for that to happen. But the more we do have those individuals in positions where they feel they can challenge and are supported for that, we've got more chance. So it's actually sharing this learning and asking why can't we do it this way? Nothing fell off. Why can't we do it? Did that answer your question?
Yeah, no, it does, because I'm always very keen to not just project my opinions on questions that I ask, but I 100% agree with pretty much everything you've just said. The leaders that are at the top of this hierarchical structure, it's just so hard to know everything and to influence and to help every single person in that structure. So for me, it makes perfect sense to try to do it in a slightly different way. But it's potentially a great opportunity now to talk about the masters and how those teachings influence the way you are now trying to operate this.
So it was, again, the pandemic was quite a wake-up call, I think, for a lot of people, and it made me personally think, what do I want for the next 20 years of my career, whatever that may look like. And it was a day, I remember it, I went over to the lakes, because that's where I get my headspace. I'm passionate about wellbeing. That's one of the foundations of what we have within the department. I went over, and it was at a time where I couldn't understand decisions that were being made nationally, locally. I was a school governor at the same time, so making decisions to prioritise children's learning and safeguarding, which was against we were overspending budgets and the school was going in a deficit, but it was the right thing to do, and all of this noise which was going on. And thinking, I cannot work in this bureaucratic space anymore. What can I do? What can I do personally to make a difference? Because pushing upwards is not doing anything. What can we do to empower others to see for themselves that they are better than they think they are? So this what they call a struck moment in coaching was just this complete clarity on the fells and the lakes, and it was just right. I'm gonna do coaching and mentoring. That was it. That was the decision I took. And I'm also going to become a Samaritan, and I'm also going to become a mental health first aider, because the foundation blocks that were so important during the pandemic for our team was well-being and trust. They were the two things, and that's what got us through. And we've got some of the best practice and the trust now in the office around wellbeing initiatives that we've got, and that was on the back of looking out for each other and just understanding everybody else. So I took that decision to do all three of them things. I became a mental health first aider, still am, became a volunteer listener at Samaritans, and enrolled to do my masters in mentoring and coaching. And the first time I met my cohort, we were all in it, pretty much the same age, all from different sectors, and we all wanted to support societal change in some way, shape or form. And it was enlightening. I found my tribe, I found my allies, I found those who I could share the frustrations with, that change isn't going to come from the top, it comes from the bottom. And the reason it's not coming from the top is because they're quite happy with what they've got. And therefore, the more you can challenge it from the bottom through coaching, and getting individuals to if they're not happy with what's going on, give them the opportunities to see through a different lens or think differently. And that's all a coaching conversation is just got this goal to achieve it. You can't see the wood from the trees. I'm going to ask you some really difficult questions, and it's up to you how you deal with that. So during the programme, we did team coaching, individual coaching, executive coaching, but for me it was around the well-being aspect of that and how you can, if you are coming to work and you are feeling burnt out or you're struggling with anxiety and depression, you've got more in your locker you can do about that than you think, because sometimes you're not going to get that support from your employer. Top and bottom, it's not there. And that was what then led to my research project, which focused on coaching for wellbeing, so for women. And when I started going off designing what that project was going to be, had to narrow it down, so it was all around women, number one, in paid caring roles, and the experience, because it was qualitative research, of having that coaching conversation, partnering with the outdoor space. So it was a case of giving you that time to think through a coaching conversation. So it's not therapy, it's not counselling, it's before it gets to that point. What can you do about your situation yourself that's in your gift before, that you can change within your circle of control that can make a difference to your well-being? So that research was done, and I had 5 volunteers straight away from different parts of the health and care system. And the evidence from that was quite enlightening. All 5 of them did it in their time. They didn't feel they could take the time out of their working day to do that 1 hour. Not good enough. You've got to give these people the time to think. Because if you're stuck in a situation, you can't see. The outdoor space created what's called soft fascination, a different mindset. And taking that conversation outdoors, side by side as opposed to across the desk, allowed them the ability to speak more openly about situations, and also give them, with that fascination of the trees or the blueness of the sea, because we did them in different locations, that switch in the brain, going right back to where we were before we were just on computers all the time. So yes, I've just got the results of that. Love doing the research, love the coaching, and some of them have actually made such progress. I'm so proud of them, because it was them. It wasn't me, it was them who did something about their situations.
Empowering.
It's so, brilliant for them. And it's what I want to do more of, and what we should be doing more of in the workplace. And again, the NHS is talking about wellbeing conversations. You've got to be trained in how to have a conversation. You've got to be trained to listen, because we talk too much.
That's so true.
Yeah. And that's going to be huge cultural shift.
The fact you base the conversations in and outdoor space is really interesting. I mean, it's something more your expertise than mine, though. You might have something to say on that, but we speak a lot about on the podcast about how you try to get in touch with that side, in tune a bit more.
It's that switch. It's looking for that sort of regulation of sort of passive nervous responses.
Yeah.
And it definitely takes practice, because even without realising over years of doing the same thing, like you said, can't see the wood for the trees, it's easy to forget that during the day-to-day. So you have to sort of retrain that mindset.
And when I was doing the research, there was a lot around therapy using outdoor space, particularly for children and vulnerable adults, and taking them over to, on retreats or in the lakes. And that's evidence is all there. The evidence was not there around, not before it gets to therapy, coaching.
Yeah.
Because at the end of the day, if we can do something through the coaching conversations, partnering with the outdoor space, potentially using, outdoor activity as part of that as well. This is something else I do in my spare time. It'll take pressure off the clinical services that are already overstretched. and bringing it back to that individual learning and teaching before it gets to that point. But you're so right. I mean, it's called attention restoration theory is what I based it on. And it's a lot of research around that, about the ability for the mind to just take that soft fascination as to what's going on, just gives you that aha moment. And that was what I experienced in the lakes, and we call it a struck moment, where you just have this moment of complete clarity because you've taken a step back and you've given yourself permission, the time to think. And it's, if you can do 6 hours over 6 months in coaching, that's all it is. For somebody to see things differently and to act differently and feel differently, then that's a good thing, right? Because then they won't go off sick and all the rest of it, and make them feel valued. That's what it's about. Investing in them.
It seems such an obvious solution. You go back to, even, if you just take like a real straightforward outcome of you reduce the pressure on clinical service. We spoke to the wellbeing teacher for yoga, didn't we? And how we start to bring services together, like involving that slant on maybe physical exercise or in the outdoor space, reduce the pressures and reduce sickness rates, and get it how that starts to get implemented in the structures we have in place.
Absolutely. I mean, one of the things that I did have as a recommendation, one of the recommendations was give colleagues the permission to take an hour a month out. Don't expect them to do it in the lunch break or on the weekend. That's just not acceptable. But also because it's an experience, and your experience of a coaching intervention will be different. Yours will be different than mine. It has to be tailored to that individual's needs, because you don't know what's going on in their lives overall. And saying here's a mindfulness app is not going to solve it, and that's more of the usual tick box exercise. We are solving well-being by doing this, but it's not, because it isn't specific to your needs.
But online e-learning courses still sat at the same desk.
It doesn't work. It doesn't work. And that was the difference, where you can tune in, you can sense make with that individual what works for them and tailor it to meet their needs, because it's not, everybody's different, everybody's human, everybody's complex. And the more we can understand that well-being is experiential, it is, it's not just about how you show up at work, because you've got everything else going on. And with coaching being confidential, you can share a bit more of what else is going on, the sense making of what has happened for that individual, and tailor it around that. When I trained to be a Samaritan, the training to have those conversations, which can be quite difficult around suicide, is exactly the same training for coaching. About actively listening, about understanding where that person's coming from, not judging them. It's the exact same thing. Exact same.
It's that compassion. And having, so as a pioneer of best practice in wellbeing.
No, this is the team. They get the freedom to just come up with things.
Exactly.
Yeah.
So my question is for you now, how do you see, or how do you envisage this sort of approach being shared or proliferating? We've seen even sometimes when sort of a better practice, it can be hard to implement that, maybe just due to familiarity or convenience even. So do you have anything to say on that topic?
Talk about it, share it, and find your networks. Because if it is something to do with, for example, if there's a research idea, for example, a way of doing things differently in research, through research, governance, management, whatever it may be, we've got the R&D Forum network, for example, to share that best practice through. And it's about not being afraid to share what works for you, because it might not work fully for somebody else, but there is no point reinventing the wheel. So it's a case of saying, okay, is anybody, and don't be shy to ask, because I'm trying to fix this. Has anybody got any bright ideas? And it's about creating that space where people feel safe to raise something that they may feel is difficult or a silly question, when it's not. It's just nobody's thought of it in that way, or somebody has and they've got an idea. And it's about that peer learning from each other and understanding that. So for me, sharing best practice when it comes to wellbeing is, in the pandemic, we introduced walkie-talkies, as we call them, where we would go for walking meetings. We still do that. We called them walkie-talkies because we thought it was quite funny. Yeah, so do you want to go for walkie-talkie? Yeah, and then you'd go for a walk and you would understand more what's going on. And it's about that's embedded now. And some people it works well, some it doesn't, and it's a case of it'll continue. And it's around sharing that best practice within the trust, within the university, but having the platforms to share it can sometimes be difficult. If you seek permission to share, use social media, use your networks that you've already got, and ask your networks to share it. And it's about that social change coming through, because there's more who want it than you think. You're not alone.
Yeah.
And I think that's what it was when I joined the master's programme, thinking I thought it was me who was struggling with change, but it's not. And it's change from the grassroots up, because social change comes from the grassroots. It doesn't come from organisations.
That concept, I think, of creating that safe space is so important, and that's that's a great crossover between the coaching and kind of just implementing things in the workplace that drive the things that we still need to do. So we're doing research in a more streamlined way, or trying to breed a culture of innovation. It's exactly how you just described it there, is having that space for people to speak up, to suggest ideas, and to get things wrong, and to fail, and to not feel the pressure, because that is what stifles the good ideas and innovation, is that pressure to always get it right.
So one of the things we did, and some of this is actually driven by fear of failing, is driven by what position you think you have, which is when we first said, who are you? I'm more than the job titles. I've got all these other aspects of my life that you can't not bring to work. And one of the things we've just done very recently within the trust and within the directorate is have a conference, and we focused on the subject of dignity and respect at work. That's come up every year in the staff survey, and it's not just for the directorate, it's in the entire NHS system. Dignity and respect and civility at work. And one of the things that I'm extremely mindful of is the narrative, and that I am just a band. I'm not looking at you as a band, I'm looking at you as a human. And this was an example of a coaching intervention I did earlier this year, where, I went from a band X to band Y. I hate it, and I don't know what to do. And so, why don't you go back down to where you were? Because I'll be seen as a failure. Well, have you got this banding around your neck? All I can see is somebody who's really unhappy at work, and if you take that label off, all you want is a bit of happiness, and that's fine, isn't it?
Labels are very dangerous. When it has that hierarchical undertone, it's even worse.
So what we did in the conference, knowing that this was an underlying thing to create that psychological safe space in the conference, was the first activity we deliberately put people on tables who didn't know each other as best possible, from different teams and across different bands, on purpose. Because we knew if you don't have that, you get comfortable and you won't engage in the conversations that we wanted. And the first icebreaker exercise was everybody had to write, regardless of who you were, on that piece of paper, your job title, your banding, and how long you'd worked in research. And you were then invited across the table to share whatever you felt comfortable with, those 3 bits of information. So if you didn't feel comfortable sharing your band, that was fine. But the important thing was to write it down. Once we'd gone around the table, you then had to rip that piece of paper up into the tiniest bits of pieces you could and put it in the bucket in the middle of the table. And I was on the stage and said to all the facilitators, because we had the facilitators trained, they all brought them to me and went straight in the bin. And it was a case of this space is not about your label or your title. It's about you and what you bring to this environment. And therefore, this is a symbol for us that it doesn't exist. And if you don't feel that you can talk freely, we need to deal with that. What was really interesting was some people had said they wanted to ritually burn that thing.
I was waiting for
set
it on fire.
Yeah, there's something did. They said we wanted to set that on fire because the boundaries and the barriers these titles create is really unhelpful, because I can bring more to my job than my job title. I have so many things like me, Samaritan outside. I can bring that experience into work, and therefore don't limit what I can do at work by my job title. Yeah. And some of the most powerful ones were the ones who were very, very high up in the hierarchy, clinical director level, felt empowered or free by ripping that up, because they knew they weren't being judged by them. And that was such a very small thing to do, but such a powerful thing to do as well, and it set the scene to create that psychological safe space where we could talk around what makes you feel valued at work. Again, the common themes which came out of it were about their feelings, not their role. Again, it's about you wanting to feel appreciated. Everybody wants to be appreciated. How can you do that? Simple thank you. It's the little things which can make such a difference. Yeah. And it was a lot of work to put in, and then we did some of the work around what the next steps are. But it's these little things about taking these labels off and seeing the person, the whole self, and not just who they are at work, can make such a massive difference. And we need to do more of that.
Yeah. It's something we tried in the small pathology team did. There's a brilliant case really of an organisation in the States, and every single person in the organisation has the same job title, and go to who you think can help you with an idea, or you go to who you like to work with, and it's not that structures that we spoke about.
Couldn't agree more. And that's the sort of behaviour that Netflix, all these Google, all these organisations have got. And the more I learn, the more I think when I did the deciding at my age to do a master's it was brave. Working full time, 2 kids, loads of other commitments going on, and studying on top of that. But it really did reignite my love of learning, and the stuff I've learned from that and will continue to learn around the need for humanocracy, not bureaucracy. Fantastic book. If you get a chance to read that, it's around human learning systems, designing things around the human, not the human trying to fit into systems that don't work. It's all of that, and how as a society we can get more people to question ways we come together, and as the whole self, and with all of with EDI, all of that has to come in, because that's how we come together. You're right. The obsession with job title and grade is awful.
It's such a prevalent discussion at the moment, and we spoke recently about creating a working environment that welcomes everybody. Yeah. And there are, I guess, some quite diverse offshoots of how do we accommodate people who are going through menopause or neurodivergence. Yeah. Actually, it's one of the things that if you create that psychological safe space, it's safe for every single person. Yeah. You don't have to be distinctive for, this is that and this is something else. By doing it from ground level, anybody can walk into that and be successful and learn and grow. And in your team, Stephen, in the individual skills that people have, seeing people, what are you good at? Because then the tasks that you're going to complete and the work that you do is going to be aligned with what you're naturally.
And you should be allowed to flourish in that space. Don't be forced to be something that doesn't allow you to be the brilliant person you are at looking at data. Don't be if you're confident in talking. Can you do that? And it's about bringing all those skills together in the mix to deliver something wonderful.
And again, knowing the human as well. So, thank you for taking the time to speak to us today. It's been amazing. I think we could keep talking.
It's been great.
But I'd like to ask you sort of what do you see on the horizon, and what sort of events have you got coming up? Is there anything,
So for me personally, getting the role as chair of the NHS R&D Forum actually gives me permission to challenge some of the systemic behaviours at national level around organisations not coming together in research for the shared purpose. So working with NIHR, working with funders, working with regulators to say we've all got this shared purpose of making a difference for research, but we need to engage early on. And we will fail, but failure is the first attempt in learning, and we just give each other that time to try new things and, develop things which will reduce bureaucracy, make research easier to take part in, make research easier to deliver. All of those aspects. So for me, I see that as something which I want to do more of. But also through my own learning is to share what, because I am happy to share things like today, what I've found worked and what didn't, and to help those who are on that journey themselves to navigate some of the bits and bobs you do come across, some of the roadblocks you hit, some of the traffic lights you'll never get through, and what techniques and tips and tools you could try yourself to really embed social change. Because at the end of the day, work is we work to service other parts of our lives. We're not there to see. Do you see what I mean? It's more around us as humans and that social change we're all crying out for, and how we can adopt that in the work environment. So it's about sharing the learning and anything else I can do or others can do in the team, and empowering others to speak up and run with things. Because I'm not an expert by any chance, but I know who is.
Yeah.
And they can run with it. So so that's what I want to do. And give others the platforms to speak as well.
Amazing. Can't wait to see.
Thank you.
Fantastic. Thank you so much, Andrew.
No, thank you. What you said doing is great.
Thank you.
In June, I took my eldest, he'd just done his GCSEs, so we took him to see a band called Muse down in Milton Keynes. So when we were down there, we thought, right, we'll go to Bletchley Park, where they did the Enigma code breaking. And that place for me absolutely captures exactly what you said there, Laura, around it doesn't matter what any perceived eccentricity you've got, because everybody at that time, it was a bit like the pandemic, came together to deal with a big threat. And if you look at who actually became part of that, neurodivergent, they're the ones who led it. They're the ones who did it. They could say things that those who are not that can't say. And it's around coming together. What skills do you need to deliver something? And it's okay, that not what that person looks like or what can they bring. And it's about that increase in acceptance that we are not all the same. We've all got our own little super capes on doing different things. And if you just accept that, then we can do some wonderful things.
Yeah.
And I came away from there really cross at the fact this was in the 40s. What have we learned? What have we learned? Nothing. Yeah. If you haven't been, and this is up your street, please go. I came away from there just thinking these will Bletchley Parks now.
If you do an on the road episode,
you know what?
We could, yeah.
You could. It is inspirational. I would recommend that place to anyone. I want to go back and back and back because there's so much. When you go into it, you feel it. You feel the.
Yeah,
I
think it is. I know it. You can recognise it as soon as you walk into it. I've been to a few
sevens.
Yeah, when we've been to a few different locations, and definitely you can feel it's more collaborative and accepting. You get the sense straight away.
So it was called Why Bletchley Park Matters as a statement, and I'll read the full thing to you. It's the past is a foreign country, they do things differently there. So saying that rings especially true in technology. Yet scratch the surface of Bletchley Park and you'll find it was remarkably ahead of its time. The men and women of Bletchley Park didn't just help end the war, they laid the foundations of the computer age. This is where Alan Turing's theories were first put in practice, and the bomb machines used to break Enigma. This was the home to Colossus, the world's first electronic program computer. Just as important as what was achieved at Bletchley Park was the way in which it was done. Bletchley Park was a melting hot, brilliant minds set free by an atmosphere of tolerance. And I started to feel that this bit. Societal norms were swept aside. What matters was what a person could do, not their gender, sexuality, religion, or any supposed eccentricity. By removing these artificial constraints, Bletchley Park brought out the best and fullest range of talent. In this sense, Bletchley's corporate success came not in spite of people's differences, but because of them. It's a compelling role model for the power of diversity. That's the message it needs to do.